But Harriet, just to kick things off, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. I have to admit, we've had I think you're episode 51 of the Responsible Edge. So thank you for making us into the second half century that we're heading into. I have to admit, I'm a bit of a fanboy today. I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but essentially, I've Harriet, it's been obviously great to have connected with you previously. I'm absolutely delighted that we've managed to get you on the show today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really excited to talk about what we're talking about today. And I'm really excited to be here with you. And yes, we've had some really brilliant conversations so far. So this should be really fun.
Excellent stuff, Harriet. Excellent stuff. So, as I alluded to in my preamble, like I am a big fan of all the things that kind of you've done over the course of your career. I think that there's a really fascinating kind of segue, if you like, between the various different projects and initiatives and businesses that you've been involved in. We always ask guests to sort of start wherever they want to start. I mean, some literally have gone back to the very early inspirations behind why they've chosen to do what they do. But perhaps just start by giving our listeners a flavor of who you are and what you've done so far in your career, and perhaps just touching on, what have been those like major inspiration points, those major like motivations, etc., that have driven you to do what you do.
Oh, Charlie, that's such a lovely intro. Okay, sure. I mean, I have had a really wiggly career. I started out. I was obsessed with climate change when I was a kid, and I went and did environmental science at university because I was so interested in it, and ended up in corporate sustainability, kind of helping big brands to have a think about, what it was that they were doing around climate and social issues. And I slightly accidentally got involved with a political campaign, and it was around the kind of Brexit referendum. And we had this moment where my social media manager was coming to me and going, there is so much stuff that is happening on the channels and I don't understand it. And we also had a lot of kind of hate directed at us as campaigners. We had some very weird stuff going on. And the day after the vote happened, loads of these accounts that had been interacting with us just closed down. They were not on these channels anymore. And they had been so disruptive and they had been taking so much of our time. I was fascinated and started to think about, well, hang on a second, if we want to tackle issues like climate change, issues like, kind of human rights, how are we going to do that if this is the information environment that we are communicating in? And so all of my work since then has been really informed by that kind of revelation. I set up CAN 7 years ago with my co-founder Jake Dubbins, who was having similar kind of issues with ethically how you communicate and advertise around issues. And CAN has grown to be a network of over 180 organisations. We are on a mission to break the economic link between advertising and harmful content. I've also done a lot of work around communicating climate change and actually how we do that when we're communicating in these information environments, how we do that so we speak to people on their terms, but also being cognizant of how they get their information as well, and done that through ACT Climate Labs. So I'm really happy to share some of those insights and hopefully talk a bit more about that work.
Harriet, that was absolutely brilliant. It's almost as if you've done lots of speaking arrangements before, which I know you've done. So we clearly know how to introduce yourself. We're going to touch on and go into each of those sort of areas that you highlighted. But let's go way back to young Harriet being inspired around climate change. Can you recall, whether there was a particular moment growing up as a child where climate change became really apparent and really sort of affected you, or was it just a gradual sort of development over time of lots of different touch points?
It's a funny thing to say, isn't it? I was obsessed with climate change. Like I think, most of us were obsessed with Barbie dolls or My Little Pony, which I was also obsessed with. I like to say. But when I got into secondary school, we had this incredible chemistry teacher, Mr. Brown. He would run all sorts of experiments. He would make chemistry so interesting and fun, which I think for a group of 30 naughty teenagers is no mean feat. And one of the things that we realised that we could do would be to derail our chemistry lessons by getting Mr. Brown to talk about climate change because he was so passionate about it. And his passion actually really, really inspired me. And, you know, so it was actually through a group of naughty kids being like, hang on a minute, what can we get away with here? That I really learned about the issues and all the incredible solutions that were being proposed and what we needed to do. And it just felt like such an interesting area to follow up. And when you're, you know, 16, 17, and they're going, what do you want to do with your life? You know, just clinging on to anything is a big thing. So for me, actually, it's just been the passion that and the interest that has taken me through my career. And so I'm very, 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 very thankful to him, and you know, to all of the 30 group of us, the group of 30 kids who were naughty.
I love that. I love the idea that your UCAS application that you put in to go to university involved you describing Mr. Brown and the fact that you possibly were trying to find a way of, you know, knocking him off his perch. And then I found that you were actually really excited and interested by the nature of what he wanted to talk about relating to climate change. Brilliant. By the way, we just for clarity regarding the responsibility, we don't condone trying to get your teachers to go off topic. Any school children that are listening out there. Harriet, let's talk about what happens next. So that's your kind of inspiration as a, you know, growing up, and you know, the passion of your teacher sort of, you know, hit you, if you like, and influenced you. Talk us through environmental science and choosing to do that at university. Like, was there a particular area of specialism, or was it just an overarching kind of degree? Like, what was, and out of interest, where did you go? And just talk us through that phase of your sort of enlightening, if you like, when it comes to these issues.
Oh, I mean, yeah, great question. So I chose environmental science at the University of Birmingham. And I did that very much because I grew up in the countryside, and I was absolutely desperate to be in a city. And to do, like, Birmingham's at the time had this amazing course that was really kind of informed by social sciences. And to be honest with you, I ended up doing a lot more of the kind of social science side of things than I did the hard science side of things. You know, which, given that I've ended up in communications, probably tells you a lot about me. But I remember we used to have lecturers that used to come in and talk to us about, you know, how our environment actually has inspired arts and culture. So the front cover of Led Zeppelin albums, for example, being influenced by, you know, kind of post-war kind of decay in certain parts of the city and what that meant for the people there. And so it was this incredible mixture of really hard science, although I never need to study the calcification of limestone caves again, and also, you know, an understanding of our weather systems, but also understanding of how our environment shapes people, and shapes the culture in which we live, and really, you know, kind of influences, I think, our narrative, our society, and the way we live our lives. And so it was a lot of fun. I suspect my, you know, kind of hard chemistry and that teachers probably won't remember me very well, but you know, the social science side of things, I really ended up kind of going that way, and also economics, and it taught me a lot about how not only how business shapes the world, and how environment shapes business, and so yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah, we're going to have to try and find Mr. Brown and see if we can get him on to corroborate these stories, if you like, from your youth. Harriet, we always like going through the sort of the timeline of guests' careers and experiences, which I definitely want to come back to. But one of the things that's just struck me, one of the kind of constant points for discussion that seems to be coming up in various different situations is this whole idea around how we as communicators, whether or not that's been advertising, PR, marketing, whatever, how you build within this modern world that we're in, like how do you build a communicator that has that awareness and appreciation and understanding of the environmental issues, and perhaps does have an appreciation of the science, enabling them to more confidently and appropriately communicate, for example, the sustainability credentials of the particular organization that they're working for. Can you just, as somebody who has literally like studied the science, if you like, and then gone through your career and began to apply, you know, your thinking and your efforts and your energies to communications broadly, like what impact has that had, do you think, on your capacity to do what you do?
That's a great question. I mean, as human beings, we understand the world through stories. So I'll give you an example. I live in France, and one of the things that constantly fascinates me is the way that we can have concepts and conversations and cultural conversations in English that aren't the same or don't exist in French. And it can be the other way around. So when you start to learn a new language, you suddenly have this whole new world of understanding unlocked for you. And the example I'll give you was I was talking to a French friend of mine about some issues she was having at work. And with particular people that she was working with. And she described something to me, and I said, that sounds like gaslighting. And she said, I have no idea what that means. And we were trying to find this kind of conversation around gaslighting in French publications, in French literature. And eventually we ended up translating some English texts for her and talking to her about it. And that helped her to understand what was going on and like why she was feeling the way she was feeling, and then also to work out strategies to sort it out. But until that point, she had felt very much like that thing was happening to her and her only, and it was not necessarily a pattern that she should be aware of, or she didn't have the tools necessarily to work out how to fix it. And that's how we understand the world. When we tell each other stories, we invent concepts in order to help us understand how things fit together. And as someone who's been communicating around climate for a really long time, one thing that I feel quite strongly is a lot of the concepts that we've created to talk to each other about climate change and about action and about sustainability actually don't really work. So a lot of the work that I've been doing, and certainly that ACT Climate Labs was set up to do, is to really understand how you talk to people on their level. So, for example, if you use the word climate change in a sentence, you may get certain people's backs up, you may get certain people to lean into those conversations, but those people are going to be quite a small minority of the population. Some people might go, oh yeah, this is something I hear about a lot, but I don't know much about it. Let's talk about it. Other people might be like, you know what, it's just too complicated. It's nothing to do with me. That's just for, kind of people over there, and it doesn't affect my world. So understanding, and we call those people in the middle persuadables, because they can be persuaded. And when you're thinking about mis and disinformation, a lot of what people who are keen to spread things like climate delay narratives, which suggest that we should slow down climate action, or who want to make us skeptical about climate action, they actually do target this group because as businesses, as NGOs, often we're trying to speak to our friends who support us, or we're trying to rebut what people who don't like us very much say. And so we forget about these people in the middle. And so a lot of what the work that we've been doing is to try and understand who these people are, how they feel about their worlds, what their worlds look like, what they care about, and then thinking about how we can talk to them about climate change. Often without using the word climate, often in terms and with benefits that really are based in their worlds. So their family, their local area, their concerns about jobs and the economy, for example. And then you start to create new stories. So instead of things like acting on climate is expensive, it's only for the elites, or it's just for people who wear Patagonia and go hiking on the weekends. You start to create new narratives where it's like, well, look, actually doing this, building wind turbines here could actually boost our economy. It could be the new shipbuilding for our part of the world. And when you get to that, you get something really magical, which is that people who would never necessarily say, oh, yes, I support this, suddenly go, I can see myself in this. I can see my benefits to me, to my family, to my area. And so you start to change the narrative. And so for me, it's all about actually testing the stories that we've got and working out new stories, which I think would hopefully start to reach more people.
And Harriet, that was so beautifully introduced, and there's so much to pick out of that, and there's so much sort of practical insight in that, in terms of an organizational level, in terms of thinking about the way that you communicate. And I know you were touching upon it perhaps more broadly, but that idea that organizations out there thinking about their sustainability communications, how they go about sharing their narrative, like it's one thing just presenting it from a sort of an ivory tower perspective. It's another thing thinking, right, what is actually going to resonate with that that core group, if you like, who perhaps don't understand these themes and concepts, and how do we communicate with them appropriately. I love that as a kind of a key takeaway. Let me ask you though, the group that was in that middle was called the Persuaders?
Persuadables.
Persuadables. I love that. Sorry, that's beautiful. Persuadables. Is in your experience the one of the key things of working with persuadables is thinking about how you take the science, which can be quite inaccessible in many ways, and how you go about communicating that to them in a way that they understand? Is that a sort of a core part of, again, thinking about your experience and knowledge of the science, if you like, from your earlier part of your career, and now applying that within comms? Is that a key lever that you're looking to pull?
So the science is an interesting one. For example, I love tennis. I really love playing tennis. It's great fun. I find it great fun to watch. But I don't necessarily have to understand, the velocity, the science behind the velocity of the ball, or the angles, or the nutritional science that the players have to take into account in their training programs in order to enjoy tennis. And so I think there is a real, in some places, for some people, it will be really important to understand the science. For example, I would love to have more people, as passionate about science communications as I am. But I think it's not the only way that we can approach the issue. And so actually, some people are going to get really excited about the techniques for solving this issue, or winning the game. The people that go and practice their serve over and over and over again to make it the best it can be. There are those people. There are people that are going to get really, really excited about materials that you can, the things that will help you achieve your goals. The rackets, the shoes that you might be wearing. And then there are people who are going to get really, really excited about all sorts of different aspects. Maybe the clothes, maybe the different playing styles versus the courts, whatever it is. But those people, we need those people too. And I think because this is such a big solutions and a big kind of focus and a big opportunity here, I think even if you don't understand the science, or you don't want to understand the science, you can still play a role in actually making this shift happen. And I do feel like that's actually a big part of the role of business, is to actually not only embody the solutions, because it's so important that we get our own houses in order, but it's also to help people understand not only what the opportunities are, help people understand how they can act, but also what the opportunities look like and feel like for them and their families. And I think sometimes we miss that gap. Sometimes we're so focused on saying, hey, we've done all this great stuff, or we're so focused on going, we want you to change your behavior, that we forget that there's a huge power. Businesses set cultural narratives. People still have their favorite adverts from when they were kids. Or you might be really annoyed by that advert you keep hearing on the damn radio every time you go out and drive somewhere. But businesses have huge roles there, and huge budgets with which to advertise with, and huge influence to actually change some of these narratives. And I think if we leaned into that, it could be really, really exciting.
Harriet, I feel already truly kind of energized and inspired by the call to arms, if you like, at the heart of some of your responses. Let me ask you this question. We're getting towards the end of our kind of initial take on you, which, by the way, 20 minutes was never going to be enough. Like we've had a whistle-stop tour, I know for a fact, through this. Let me ask you, I think it's always an interesting question, especially for somebody like you. When you get to the end of your career, and you're looking back, what do you want to be able to say about what you've done?
Wow, that's a really good question. I mean, I would just really like to have at least inspired people to do things and to think differently about not only communications, because we've talked a lot about the kind of climate communications part. And I just feel like, actually, because I'm passionate and, full disclosure, because I'm a massive geek about things like climate change, I would love people to feel passionate about whatever part of that science or that solution or whatever it is that can actually, bring them, bring them benefits. So that's on one side of things. On the other side of things, and I haven't talked a lot about this yet, but it's like the the conscious advertising network side of things, we look a lot at the structures of our information environments. And I think this will be kind of quite useful for the disinformation work later. But like, I would love for more businesses actually to be thinking about their advertising supply chains in the same way, you know, they think about their, you know, their all of their other kind of physical supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is because the advertising is, it is one of the biggest kind of actually funders of the media.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most organizations, you pick up a newspaper and you see an advert in it. And therefore, if advertisers thought more carefully about where they place their ads, they could actually create huge changes in our social discourses around important topics like climate change. So, for me, I would love to bring about a moment where advertising supply chains are thought about in the same way that we think about our physical supply chains, and that kind of brands and their agencies put thought into making sure that they fund quality information about things like climate change, and that they're not funding the kind of the hate speech and the misinformation that we see out there. And that's how you know I'm a huge geek, isn't it? Because I didn't, could have said world domination, I could have said anything, but I've gone for those two. So there we go.
I love that. On the basis of acknowledging our listenership, I think going for what you've gone for as opposed to world domination is probably going to keep you in the good books. But Harriet, let me ask you. You've referred to Cannes a few times. I think it would be really interesting. I know we'll come on to talk a little bit more about your work at the back end of the conversation. But can you just, for our listeners that don't know, just especially in light of what you just described in terms of looking at that kind of, and sorry, I'm going to butcher this, but I suppose the kind of, the creative supply chain underpinning, the work that advertising agencies do. What are you guys doing specifically to kind of enable that? What are you working on in that perspective?
Amazing. So Cannes, basically the Conscious Advertising Network, I call it Cannes. There's lots of Cannes in advertising, but this is the CAN one. We basically we're set up to solve some of the issues that I've described around there being a lot of misinformation and hate out there. We were set up essentially to help advertisers to navigate that, because at the time there was a real big discussion about, oh my gosh, advertisers had realized if we appear on an online channel or a TV channel or in a print newspaper next to stuff that crosses hard boundaries, so hate speech as defined by the UN, hardcore disinformation, about very, very important issues, then we are not only funding it but also legitimizing it. Studies show that if people see a brand, in a space with mis and disinformation, they think less of the brand, but they also think the mis or disinformation is more true or more credible than it is. So, we had brands kind of suddenly going, oh my gosh, what do we do about this? And so Cannes has kind of got several levers within it. We help brands to make adverts that are more responsible, that represent communities better, that have sustainable behaviors on the screen by signposting to all these great initiatives that are out there that can help them do that. We help brands to place their adverts consciously. Mm-hmm. So, if we talk about these media systems being funded by advertising, well, actually, we need to make sure that there's the right incentives in place so that newspapers and other outlets want to write quality content about climate change, because at the moment, advertisers are often blocking words around climate change. We need to make sure that there are incentives for the creation of media for diverse communities, because again, sometimes advertisers are blocking inadvertently community media. And we need to make sure that there's incentives for the production of great news and great reporting, because again, sometimes advertisers are kind of going, oh, it's too risky to appear on the news, when in fact there's huge business benefits from doing so. So we need to make sure that kind of really great quality content is in everyone's media plans. And then we also need to make sure that the fraudulent, advertising fraud is reduced, because advertising fraud funds organized crime. And we need to make sure that the really bad parts of our media ecosystem, stuff that's got genuine hate speech, that's got genuine disinformation about things like climate change, is being considered very carefully, or is being removed completely from media spend. And I think if we did that, then we would have something called information integrity. It's not very sexy, but that's what the UN calls it. But it would mean that we could have really good, vibrant, diverse cultural discourses about the things that matter without the untruths and without the hate speech that harms people. And that's kind of what we're looking at.
Harriet, that's one hell of a brief. I mean, that's amazing. You've got a lot on your plate. Yeah, wow. And then actually, that brings us. There's a lot. And by the way, anyone that wants to check out Can, I'm going to refer to it as Can as well, because I know there are a few, but I think we can. In this arena, you own Can. We'll definitely link to Can throughout our material, so you guys can go and check out the work that Harriet and the team are doing. Let's segue now into introducing the article. I think it's so interesting, having heard, the brief and the work that you're doing at Can. Obviously, AI and generative AI in particular has been this very topical area that's risen its head recently over the last few years. Really interested to kind of hear about Can and about the work that you guys are doing relating to AI. But perhaps let's start by introducing our listeners to the article that I think it was Stella Levinci in Desmog put together. So, Harriet, would you mind just giving our listeners kind of an overview of what the article covers?
Yes, so I love this article because I think there's a lot of hype around not only AI content production, but also mis and disinformation. And Desmog, if you don't already know it, is just such a great organization, such a great publication. They do really, really well-informed kind of write-ups of lots of different topics surrounding climate mis and disinformation and other things. So what this does is this article starts to break down actually, kind of what is this problem? They've done a lot of work. Stella's talked to a lot of kind of AI researchers. And so you know that you're getting really good quality information. So it starts by kind of, I think, drilling down into why AI-based mis and disinformation is challenging to the environment. And it breaks down, I think, really importantly, it breaks down a lot of the jargon. So when we start to get into the kind of or lift the hood of, the AI landscape, it's very complicated. I couldn't, I've done fellowships in AI and I struggle with it quite often, but it breaks down key terms, things like LLMs, so large language models, why they're kind of really important for the creation of AI mis and disinformation. And basically, the crux of the article is that AI generated mis and disinformation. It means that it kind of democratizes the production of mis and disinformation. It makes it very easy for anyone to create. And it also makes it very easy to be created at scale. So it creates all of these new kind of business models whereby, kind of people could just produce loads and loads of it. It could get monetized through advertising online and then distributed for the social media platforms very, very quickly, because misinformation is engaging content. People get outraged by it and it just shoots through those recommendation algorithms. So it does a really, really good job of explaining that. And then just when they've terrified us, they talk about solutions, which is so important. And they've got some really great, kind of one of my favorite academics, actually, geeky again, a guy called John Cook, who talks to us about actually how we can look at debunking and really effective models for doing that. It looks at, kind of regulation and how policymakers can step in. And it looks at things like defunding that mis and disinformation by better practices via the kind of the advertising industry as well, which is the stuff I work on. So it's really comprehensive. I assume it will be linked to with this content, but do have a look at it, because I just think it breaks everything down really simply and understandably.
Harriet, that was beautifully introduced. I might ask you to come back on if we could afford to, we get you on every show and you could do the summary introduction for every single one of the pieces. That was great. Let me ask you, I'm going to ask you some simple questions relating to this. Like, when you think about AI and you think about advertising, and there's obviously, it's almost, we're at that tantalizing point where on the one hand you can look at AI and you can look at like all the potential problems associated with misinformation and disinformation, which are highlighted in the article, and on the other you can look at like all of the solutions and the improvements that ultimately AI could help enable in terms of tackling those problems and ultimately supporting, you know, really great kind of content creation and messaging, etc. Like, where do you sit in terms of like terrified, concerned, etc., versus hopeful and enthusiastic about the role that AI can play moving forward?
So I am optimistic as long as we get the basics right. So we are, like, I've worked in ad tech now for about 10 years, or looking, or, you know, ad tech adjacent for about 10 years. And our failure to regulate and our failure to really get a handle on the ad tech market has led to all sorts of things that I work on that are not very nice. So it has led to these funding models for hate and misinformation. It has led to, you know, this kind of almost a collapse in funding in news in some cases. And my concern is that if we apply, and actually when I go and talk to kind of policymakers, a lot of them don't get it. A lot of them don't understand it. And I don't blame them. It is very, very, very complicated. But it is just advertising technology. Now, when we look at these AI systems, they are exponentially more complicated. And in fact, some of them are these things that we call black boxes, where even the people that make them, even the people that program them and feed them, don't know how they work, because they learn from they learn from themselves, much like the human brain does. Now that's incredible. That means that we could start to spot patterns and to create solutions that human beings just wouldn't be able to do. And that's very, very exciting. And I think there's some great literature out there on the role of AI in, kind of like making our energy systems more efficient so that we use less energy, of farming in different ways. There's all these incredible applications. But at its core, unless we start to ask stupid questions, which are not stupid questions, and unless we start to regulate this space in ways that everyone will tell us will destroy innovation, they won't allow us to, they won't allow the industry to move so quickly, unless we start to think about what the balance is between a level of innovation and the potential things, the harmful effects of this technology. Unless we start to do that well, and unless we start to do that beyond the highest risk technologies, as we've got in the EU at the moment. So the EU's AI Act only, looks at the technologies that can cause the most harm, like things like, kind of like automated weapons and really, really dangerous stuff. Unless we start to think beyond that, I think that we're going to get stuck, and we are going to enter a world where the harms are starting to be caused. Mm-hmm. And regulators are going to be struggling to catch up to sort out those harms. And meanwhile, companies are going to be making a lot of money with these AI technologies. So I think that we probably need to learn from ad tech and work out, one, policymakers need to understand these technologies. And so we need translators, we need storytellers who understand these technologies to the point where they can explain them to lay people. And absolutely, full disclosure, I still struggle to explain ad tech to most people. So, this is no mean feat. Number two, we need to work out where we sit, in terms of risk versus opportunity. And number three, I think we need to really think carefully about the transfer of power that these AI technologies create, because at the moment we have some incredibly powerful and rich, unfortunately, mainly men, kind of mainly from the US, from Europe, who have a lot of power and a lot of control over the system. So I do think we also need to consider the power dynamics. There's a whole wave of academia now that says we're entering a world of techno-feudalism, where basically we are now serfs on this, on these digital landscapes, and we have our kind of our kind of royalty, our thief, kind of tech fiefs who rule over us. So I think there's no way that we can really kind of like think about this without thinking about the dynamics behind it. And although I am super excited for us cracking some of the problems that have been eluding humanity for a while, I also realistically think that we need to have take a deep breath and go, what is the world that we want to create with these technologies, and how do they get us there? And there's some brilliant organizations doing that already. Like, Mozilla does incredible stuff. You've got you've got AI Now, you've got all of these organizations, the Ada Lovelace Institute, they're all thinking about these issues. They're all producing stuff about it. So if you're interested, like go and read, go and read. But we've got lots of people thinking about it, but we need to make it action. We need to action it. And I think business has a huge role here around actually thinking about it. I think business and NGOs, again, together can tell better stories. We can think about this in our procurement processes so that we embed this thinking when we're doing things. And Cannes manifestos, we've looked at we've mainly looked at AI from a procurement perspective, and we've mainly looked at AI from a kind of like data input and review perspective, because actually brands need to understand what they're getting themselves into, or when they're kind of like actually bringing on new contracts that have AI elements. And within the manifestos, there's some kind of guidance about questions that can be asked. And then we also need to have the ability to monitor the impacts that these technologies might be causing, so we can look for harms and we can look for rebound effects and all of those things before they start to really harm us. And so a part of our work is looking at actually, what are the questions that businesses can ask of potential AI suppliers when businesses are developing their own. What should they be looking out for? What does that mean in the context of the harms that we look at? And I think if we do that and there's good regulation, then I'm optimistic.
And Harriet, that was absolutely brilliant, and I love it because you've just added another. You briefly took us through Cannes' kind of agenda, if you like, and the things that you're working on, and then as kind of I expected, AI has now come along and added to it to such a significant extent. You really are busy with everything you've got on. Let me ask you: do you think if we're talking about sort of an individual, organization, company here, business? Do you think that there is a way to utilize the generative AI tools that we have available to us in a way that is ethical and responsible at this stage? Or do you think that, on the basis of some of the insights that we gleaned from the article that talked about, I think, there was a test done on the amount of misinformation, et cetera, that was created by Bard and by ChatGPT, etc. Are there just no ways of ultimately using these tools and getting it right, or are there ways that organizations can adopt them appropriately?
Yeah, so I found those articles really interesting because, yes, I mean, I think it's well documented that these AI tools will either can either produce stuff that's misinformative because of the way that they learn from the training models that they've been learning from, but also because they can be hugely biased. Again, because of the inability, or not necessarily inability, but it's very difficult to correct data and to kind of correct bias within these training models. Again, some amazing work on how to do it, but I'm not sure how much it's being implemented. So we have to go and use these tools knowing that they can be biased and knowing that they might not tell us the truth. And I know that previously, like kind of Jake, my co-founder, had a lot of fun putting a lot of different prompts into, kind of Midjourney and Grok and various others to try and, just to see how deep this went. And it's pretty bad, I think, But on the flip side of that, just this week, we've had an example of an ad campaign being pulled because it contained racist stereotypes. So Heinz got in trouble because there was an advert that featured a family sitting around the table at a wedding, and it failed to include the bride. The bride was black, and it failed to include her dad in that tableau. And so, even with I think we already do have the checks and balances and the solutions in place that will help us use these tools. but I do think we just have to do it with a knowledge of what they are and a knowledge of what their failings are, as well as what their huge, the huge opportunity for them are. So I do think, and in our manifestos, we talk to organisations about how they can make sure that diversity and inclusion is included throughout things like the casting processes, in terms of how they assess creative, all of those things. And I think that if we can still use those same checks and balances on AI generated content. So that's one thing. AI is biased, but so are we. Who knew? And then, I think the second thing that we need to do is to think about, like, that stupid question. You don't understand how it works. It's probably not a stupid question. It's and if your AI vendor can't answer it, or if you're not happy with the way that they answer it, then ask someone else there or escalate it. Because, genuinely, we often get ourselves into a space with technology where we don't ask the right questions because we think that's stupid. I should know this. It's probably for people above my pay grade or people cleverer than me. No, like we do need to understand what these things are, and kind of like and the impacts that they have. Otherwise, we end up with this kind of collective devolving of responsibility to algorithms and AI products. And let me tell you, AI still doesn't like large language models still don't get sarcasm. They still don't get words that are reclaimed by communities. They still don't get, some of them are still trying to work out the difference between a dog and a muffin, and that's an online joke. So if you don't know, ask. And if you're not convinced, then, ask again and ask someone different. But, if these vendors can't tell you and can't tell you in plain language, then there may well be an issue. So, yeah.
And out of interest, but again, brilliantly positioned, Harriet. To get slightly practical with, let's say, we a part of our listenership are, C-suite executives who are marketing comms people. Like, what if they are sat there thinking, right, the opportunity of generative AI versus the threat of getting it wrong, of all of the problems that are kind of we've highlighted during this conversation so far. You've obviously mentioned some of the CAN's manifestos and kind of processes and suggested procedures and policies, etc. Like, what would be your number one piece of advice to an organization that was starting to think about, okay, how do we utilize this technology most appropriately in terms of how we go about communicating? Where would you start?
Honestly, I would start with your, as with anything, you start with your brand values in an organization. Like, your brand values tell you, and your ways of work, they're what tell you what's our appetite for risk. How do we want to show up in society? Kind of like, what do we want to embody and what do we want to communicate? And it's, and I think you need to start there. And then I think, understand that the procurement process, you as the brand you can write in your RFPs, RFIs, everything that goes out. You can set what you want contractors to send you. You can set what the information that they can be providing. And I think making sure that you're managing this and, thinking about things like thinking about things like funding of hate and disinformation, what your ads are appearing next to, all of that stuff, considering that stuff at C-suite level, mm-hmm. within your risk register, with everything like that, that's super important, because these supply chains, also with new EU legislations and I always get these acronyms wrong, but the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, there is potentially scope for lots of these supply chains, advertising first, potentially AI, to be included within those. So I do think you need to be kind of like thinking in the same way that you would do about the potential child slavery in a kind of like a fashion kind of manufacturing supply chain. We need to be starting thinking about these supply chains in the same way. And then I think making sure that you're happy with the information that your vendor provides you. So working, I think, with experts to understand, well, what is the information that we need to be asking for? Things like human rights impact assessments, or sustainability impact assessments are really important questions to ask. And I think it's not just about the model themselves, the model and how that's the data that goes in it, and kind of all of that stuff. It's also about the operations. So AI technology is extremely energy intensive. We've seen both Microsoft and Google, kind of like looking like they're going to really miss their sustainability targets by a long way because they're using AI. I think there's also questions about, well, hang on a second, how is, kind of like, how is this, how is this huge demand for energy being met? Does it meet with our sustainability aspirations as well? So, as well as the human rights, the clever stuff where I would say get an expert in, there's also the fundamentals, the operations where you've probably got the all of the expertise in house to kind of like make sure that you're asking those questions as well. And I think the third thing is, just because it's complicated doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to understand it, and doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to explain it to you. And like I said, if they can't, there's a problem.
I love that, Harriet. That's some super practical insights. And I think you to touch on that last point, to understand the huge opportunity to get this right and lay the solid foundation in place of how you go about scrutinizing, questioning, ultimately deciding upon how your advertising creative supply chain is put together, I think is really the compelling reason or justification for having go through the kind of process that you've alluded to. I would suggest, it sounds like on the CAN website, people can get more information regarding, starting to take those first steps, if you like. So again, would suggest anyone out there that's sort of inspired by the conversation to go and have a look at that. Harriet, can you believe that we've whistle stopped through like 46 minutes of touching on, I know, a lot of different areas and not being able to go into too much depth, but that was absolutely brilliant. Can we finish off with the magic wand question? So again, you've touched on a few things already that I think, very much we could get that magic wand out to help us with. But let me finish with this. If we were to hand you that magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
If I could change one thing about the corporate world and how we act, I would love us to really lean in to our role, what we think our role is in solving climate change. I am obviously a massive geek, as I have said, but I do think there's just so much opportunity here. And I think we're slightly held back by framing things in the wrong way and the stories that perhaps we've told ourselves that no longer serve us. And I would love every single organization to go, what is our role here? Are we a solutions focused? Can we create a solution? Can we get our house in order? Can we bring our employees with us? Can we bring consumers and different consumers with us in a way that would really change things and kind of reach these persuadables. And obviously, kind of is our advertising, could we invest our advertising budgets in ways that would better support better cultural discourse? And I think if all organizations kind of really leaned into that, not only would I see much better, kind of climate change focused entries at CAN, but I would see lots of kind of really geeky solutions to get excited about. And we'd have loads of great case studies for CAN, I'm just saying. So please, let's do it.
I love that, Harriet. I love that. And I think one theme that sort of very much come through this conversation and has made absolute sense of you naming your organization the Conscious Advertising Network is that conscious element is the key. You've alluded to throughout this conversation the need to just take a breath. I think when you use that term, take a breath, when it refers to AI tech and everything like that, that resonates so strongly. Like, yeah, we just all need to take a moment, inform ourselves, become consciously aware of our surroundings, who we are, what role we play, and then ultimately to make a determined, informed next step. I think, that to me is one of the kind of key takeaways from the conversation we've had. So, well, just want to say a massive, massive thank you for joining us this morning. I, for one, have had a lot of fun and learned a lot. So thank you, Harriet.
Me too, Charlie. That was really great fun. Thank you.